Uh, Thank you all for joining us this evening for a webinar presentation hosted by Lower Cape Fear Wildlife, which is a local chapter of the North Carolina Wildlife Federation. My name is Luke Bennett, and I am the Conservation Coordinator for the North Carolina Wildlife Federation. I'll be helping to moderate the webinar this evening. And before we get started, I'd like to mention real quick that if you'd like to ask a question during the presentation, you are more than welcome to do so, either by typing the question into the chat or into the Q&A. Both are found at the bottom of your screen, and you can type your question at any point during the webinar. We'll save some time at the end to get to as many questions as we can. And now, with that, I'll pass it over to Laura Sharkey, who is here representing Lower Cape Fear Wildlife as one of their chapter leaders, and she'll say a few words about the chapter and then introduce our speaker for this evening. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Luke. Hi, everybody. I'm Laura Sharkey, and I'm with Lower Cape Fear Wildlife. And we are a relatively new chapter of the North Carolina Wildlife Federation that represents the northern coastal area of Brunswick County and New Hanover County, which includes the city of Wilmington. I'd like to tell you that we have some exciting conservation projects that we're going to be involved with this fall that are going to create or improve wildlife habitat in New Hanover County. And we will be looking for volunteers to help us carry out those plans. So please sign up for email notifications on our webpage or follow us on Facebook to stay informed. Luke will also provide our chapter's website and social media links with a follow-up email along with the webinar recording later this week. Now I would like to introduce our speaker tonight, Carrie McCullen. Carrie works for the North Carolina Forest Service as a forest supervisor at Turnbull Creek Educational State Forest, which is located in Elizabethtown in Bladen County. Her work consists of educating groups of all kinds and all things trees and forestry related. And she also manages an 890-acre demonstration forest. Carrie serves as public information officer on one of two complex incident management teams rostered by the North Carolina Forest Service. Though Carrie is based in Elizabethtown, her work on the incident management team has sent her all over the state and as far as to Texas and Oregon for fires as well as hurricanes. When Carrie's not at work, she is based in Fayetteville with her husband and a 2.5-year-old daughter and 3 beehives. Please welcome Carrie.
Thank you, Laura. Appreciate that introduction. And yes, if you ever need me to come back and talk about beehives, we can talk about that till no end. But tonight we're talking about wildfires. Again, as Laura mentioned, I'm Carrie McCullen, and I work for the North Carolina Forest Service. And so we're going to be talking about wildfires tonight. It's a big buzz topic. Things have been a little dry here lately, and we'll talk about weather as well as we go. So tonight we're talking wildfires, the science behind wildfires and those that fight them. Let's go ahead and get started. All right, our topics for tonight. The first is, what is a fire and why does it? What's the word? Burn. I have to admit, I'm a 90s kid, so anytime we have a presentation, of course, there might be a chance for a classic Disney reference there. Who fights wildfire in North Carolina? Could a wildfire approach your home, and what can you do to slow the spread? And also, most importantly, where can we go to learn more after tonight's presentation? So let's get into it. What makes a fire in the first place? We have the fire triangle here listed, and this is basically the essential element for all things that you need for fire to happen. If you ask a structure firefighter, there's some new research out that may include a fourth element. They call it a tetrahedron, so apologies for the structure firefighters out there, but we'll keep it simple tonight and talk just about the fire triangle. The 3 basic elements that you need are, as listed, oxygen, heat, and fuel. With those items combined, you will essentially be able to produce fire. If one of those items is lost or not available, fire is likely not to happen. So to explain this a little bit further, I have a video that demonstrates this. I'm an educator at heart, so this is a basic really quick activity that you can share. If you are an educator, you can share it with your students. You can share it with children. You can share it with anybody to better explain the fire triangle and how it all works to make fire happen. So with a little bit of virtual magic here, we'll get this video going. And Luke or Laura, please let me know if you do not hear audio on this.
In this demonstration, we are going to investigate the fire triangle. The fire triangle is composed of 3 parts or sides: oxygen, fuel, and heat. These 3 parts are required for fire to exist in nature. Removing one of the parts or sides of the fire triangle can eliminate fire, and this is often how our firefighters work to extinguish fire on a wildfire incident. Let me show you. Today we have some simple items you can find at home: a small candle, a glass jar, a spray bottle with water, and some matches. As this is an experiment involving matches and flame, kids, be sure you have an adult to assist you. Remember, Smokey Bear always says to be careful with matches. Here, the candle represents fuel. It is a source that can be ignited by flame. Oxygen is all around us, and heat can be created when we strike a match. If we remove one of these elements, fire will cease to exist. First, let's start by removing the fuel, the candle. We'll light the match. So there's the heat and the oxygen, but the fuel has been removed, so no fire. Firefighters remove fuel on a wildfire by using tools or dozers to scratch away flammable organic matter such as leaves, roots, and organic soil to reach mineral soil, which will not burn. Next, let's remove the oxygen. I'll strike the match and light the candle. You see, the oxygen, heat, and fuel are interacting on the candle. Now, let's cover the candle with the glass jar and seal it as tightly as possible. In time, the flame will go out because all of the available oxygen has been consumed in the jar. On a wildfire, firefighters remove available oxygen by covering the flame with mineral soil, burying or covering the flame with tools. Lastly, there's heat. Let's light the candle again. As before, the fuel, the candle, is interacting with heat and oxygen. We can remove the heat by spraying the candle with water. Water will extinguish the flame, and this practice is used on wildfires when firefighters spray the flames with water handling equipment or water is dropped from aircraft onto a flaming front. Now you have seen how the 3 parts or sides of the fire triangle can be removed to extinguish fire.
Okay, so that is a very quick and easy demonstration that can be utilized.
In order for folks to better understand how the fire triangle or how the 3 elements of the fire work to produce fire. Let's go a little bit further and more technical on things. We're not going to go too terribly deep tonight as far as all the elements of how fire happens and what we can do there, but just to have a basic understanding. Okay, so once the fire occurs, once you have those 3 elements in place, things can happen and change a fire once it ignites. So what is it that changes a wildfire once it gets going? For that, we can relate to the fire behavior triangle, which is another element that we use or look at where some things kind of work together and can manipulate a wildfire's activity. Those three elements are fuels, topography, and weather. And we'll go into a little bit more detail about those as we go forward. So for weather, there are many different options that we talk about when we mean weather and fire. Wind, of course, is a common one that makes a lot of sense. If there's a lot of wind, it could cause a fire to spread. One we may not really realize would be thunderstorms. Thunderstorms, as they come through, yes, they have the potential to drop heavy amounts of water, which could be helpful, but oftentimes thunderstorms can create a lot of wind, a lot of erratic wind behavior that can really stir up a wildfire and cause it to move in a lot of different directions. In fact, a thunderstorm cell has a tendency to move wind radially and downward, almost like a downdraft effect, and it can move it out in all different directions, causing a fire to have a lot of erratic behavior. Then we have something called a sea breeze. In this part of the world, sea breezes are very common occurrences. And to expand on that, for those that might not be aware of what a sea breeze is, typically during the day, the land is warmer and the sea is cooler. And sometime, usually in the afternoon hours, when the land is the warmest of the day, the hottest part of the day, our hot air is naturally rising into the atmosphere. And what happens is that warm air gets displaced by a cooler sea breeze as it cycles through, and the sea breeze will actually come on land, whereas the warm air, once it rises, it will head out towards the sea. And how this matters, or what it changes with a wildfire, is that this cool sea breeze can often be strong enough that it can affect the wind locally in the area of the coast. And sometimes, if it's really strong, it can affect several miles away from the coastline. Where I am based out of Elizabethtown in Bladen County, we can feel sea breezes that far inland, about an hour, hour and a half from the coast itself. So usually the sea breeze has to be quite strong, somewhere around 8 to 10 miles an hour. And at that point, you can start to feel it well inland. And why that matters is typically our prevailing winds in this area are southwesterly winds, meaning that the wind pushes from the southwest towards the northeast. If we have this cool sea breeze effect happening and it's strong enough in the afternoons, it can completely change the wind direction of the area, the coastline, and inland. And this can affect our firefighting tactics. In fact, folks have seen on a wildfire in this area that the fire will be moving in our general southwesterly wind direction as it normally does, and then in an instant change a completely different direction. And it can be very hazardous. So sea breezes are something that we have to be very aware of when we're fighting wildfires. Another biggie is frontal passages, similar reason, but different wind direction. So again, we have our southwesterly winds that are a prevailing wind pattern that we have here in this part of the world. A frontal passage, particularly one that comes from the northwest, has a tendency to push the winds in a different direction from the northwest towards the southeast, and that can also impact how we fight fires, particularly with the strategies that we utilize for firefighting. Frontal passages often have heavy wind events ahead of them, and it can be a really dangerous situation. Humidity. Everyone is experiencing their own personal swamp this time of the year, so hopefully it won't be too terrible bad, but the humidity in that condition is actually good for us because higher humidities mean that fire is less likely to be as erratic or as able to catch fuels, able to catch the vegetation on fire. With humidity, lower humidities, the days that are really nice and it's breezy and there's not a lot of moisture in the air, that's when we get into danger with having potential for really bad wildfires. When the humidities drop into the 20s or less, that can really be a dangerous situation because it's drying out all of the available vegetation that it could potentially catch fire. So higher humidity days are actually good, believe it or not. And then, of course, drought, which is a long-term weather pattern. If conditions continue and drought occurs as they have in years past, that could also be potential for some really severe wildfires and prolonged wildfire fighting, which can also be its own safety issue or concern. Okay, so we covered one element of the fire behavior triangle. Next, we'll take a look at fuel, okay? Now, don't get too concerned over these two graphics that I have on the right-hand side here. We'll talk through some of it, but I did just want to show you the complexity involved in learning about all the different types of fuel characteristics that there are. Folks that are fire managers and study wildfires and work wildfires on a day-to-day basis, they know this like the back of their hand. They've gone through quite a bit of training. They study this for their whole entire career and how it impacts fire behavior. So fret not, we're going to work through the basics of it tonight, but just wanted to show you exactly how complex it is when we talk about fuel characteristics and the effects of what they do on a wildfire. Now, fuel, break that down. For the folks that may not quite understand that term, we're not talking about gasoline or any type of flammable liquid that we put on the vegetation. When we talk about fuel in a wildfire sense, we're talking about the vegetation itself, what can be consumed in a wildfire situation that could carry the fire. And here's a few things that we do consider. So the compactness of the fuel, how tightly compacted is it? Is it stacked really tightly? Is it not quite as tightly placed? Is it looser? Is it really packed down? Okay. Fuel loading. So fuel loading is the actual amount of material that's available to burn. If you don't have anything available to burn, if it's just bare ground, then there should not be much spread of wildfire there. If you have a lot of pine straw, a heavy duff layer in the soil where there's a lot of organic fuels, a lot of leaf litter, things like that, that can really carry fire, that's what we're talking about with fuel loading. Then going into chemical content, not all leaves are made the same. A lot of them have different chemical makeups, and we'll talk a little bit more about this later on, but there are certain fuels that are more flammable than others. And so it's very important to sort of know those species that are more highly flammable because that impacts how the fire is going to behave. The size and shape. So if you have ground fuels, for instance, here in this bottom graphic, that are logs, a lot of down debris from a cutover or just a lot of dead logs that had fallen over the years. And that's what you have. It may take a little bit longer for that type of fuel to catch fire. If you have a lot of leaf litter, lighter material, grasses, pine straw, things like that, it would be able to catch fire a lot more quickly because it doesn't take as much to heat up that type of vegetation as opposed to a larger size of fuel, such as a large log. And then that ties in directly with fuel moisture. So if the vegetation has received a good bit of rain recently, it's less likely to catch fire because the moisture in the vegetation keeps it from being highly flammable. Exactly opposite, if it's been rather dry lately, as it has been in this time period, the past week or so, the moisture is beginning to dry out of the fuels. We take a really good look at this with what we call 5-hour fuels, which I won't really go too much into the weeds on that, but it's basically your fine fuel moisture. So your grasses, as I mentioned before, the leaf litter, pine straw, those things that are able to catch fire a lot more quickly, excuse me. If they lose moisture in a way that they're very tender and very dry, then the likelihood of a wildfire is highly likely. All right, and then just a couple things over here to list. We see all of these different fuel characteristics on the side here. They can affect things such as ignition, how quickly it is to catch fire, how quickly it is to spread, how intense the fire can be, whether or not the fire would have a lot of spotting in advance of it. So in other words, if it would be able to throw fire embers into another area that has not yet caught fire. Torching, if the fire was able to get up into the canopy of a forested area, if it was able to climb up the tree, so to speak. That's what we mean by torching. And then crowning is actually when the fire carries through the tree canopy itself. It's not actually touching the ground because the tree needles or the tree leaves that are in the canopy are so dry that they could potentially carry the fuel that way or carry the fire that way. That's quite a dangerous situation when there is crowning involved in a wildfire. And the bottom graphic again just shows some different types of fuels that we look at. Surface fuels would be what is on the very surface of the soil. Aerial fuels, of course, would be things that are in the air. And ladder fuels may be some branches and things that would carry the fire up from the ground to the canopy. Ground fuels, of course, are in the ground. And then, of course, organic soils, which we have quite a bit of that here. Organic soils are soils that have a lot of organic matter, the leaf litter that we mentioned earlier. Anything that comes off of the tree and lays down on the ground has an organic matter to it. And that soil can actually act as fuel in a wildfire. And to give you a perfectly good example, ground fire. If you've ever heard anybody in the fire service use that term before, this is what ground fire looks like. Ground fire is pretty rough. So all of the black there in the image is where the fire has literally eaten away at the duff layer and the subsurface of the soil. What you're seeing left is ash. And this can be very dangerous for a lot of reasons. It can also be very ecologically hazardous. So what's happening here is, as we mentioned, the heavy organic soil can smolder for an extended period of time. It can spread through pockets and root systems under the soil surface. So this is actually the area around the roots getting eaten away by fire. Fire consumes the organic matter, much like campfire logs burning. So when you have a campfire, what you see in the morning is a bunch of ash that's fallen. You don't see any much remnants of the logs that you use. They're not in their original state. What's left is just a bit of ash at the bottom of your fire pit. So when organic matter is consumed, same principle, what is left is ash and then mineral soil that cannot burn and large holes in the ground, as you see here. We have technology through the Forest Service, use of drones that can detect where ground fire exists on a wildfire. And we'll see a little bit of that a little bit later on. But also to note, ground fire is a source of wildfire reignition, which is why firefighters spend a good bit of time working to extinguish these smoldering areas. What often happens is the fire can sit there over a period of time and just fester, so to speak. And so oftentimes the soil and the vegetation around these pockets can regrow. And we get what we call reburn, where the area that has regrown and the vegetation that has regrown and greened up again can actually catch fire if it gets dry enough. And that's a really hazardous situation. All right, and then that third element in fire behavior is topography. So the first one, fire moves faster uphill. That is a pretty good standard there to remember. We also have the channeling of winds due to river and creek tunneling. So anywhere where there's a river bluff, the Cape Fear River is a very good example of that, or a very deep creek. There's a chance that the winds can kind of channel and tunnel through that area and can oftentimes be a little different than what the surface winds are around it. That can change how wildfire spreads. Of course, we have something called Carolina Bays, which we'll talk about a little bit later on. There are Pocosons that are just to the north and east of us in the middle part of the state and the coastline. Pocosons are called swamps on a hill. So essentially they have a little bit of topography as well to work with, very similar to a Carolina Bay, but a little different. And then in our mountain region of the state, we have mountains, valleys, bluffs, and steep slopes that are all potential for fast moving fires. All right, the Carolina Bay, Bay Fuels and Gallberry. Gallberry gets its own special mention because it is just one of those really interesting sources of vegetation. Wildlife absolutely love it, but it is a real danger when fighting wildfire. So some fuels can burn more intensely because of the chemical makeup of the leaves. We mentioned that earlier. Waxy and resinous fuels burn more intensely and can contribute to a rapid rate of fire spread. So anything that's got a lot of wax on the leaf, a lot of our hardwoods, hollies, things like that that have waxy leaves to them, that can burn a lot more intensely. And then anything that has a lot of resin in it, such as a lot of our pine needles, the gallberry, of course, other species that have a lot of resin, that can also contribute to fire intensity and fire spread as well. Carolina bays, of course, have thick vegetation with with bay trees, gallberry, and wax myrtle. Some pines and other resinous species. It's really fantastic for wildlife, as we mentioned, but not so much for fighting wildfires. And then some bays do hold water, as we well know from this area. Some are dry, but most hold some form of highly organic soil. The organic soil can burn, as we mentioned before, with ground fire and smolder for an extended period with the heat getting trapped in the soil. And it can travel underground and resurface in other areas, which can be very hazardous. Often the soil is mucky and will not allow equipment to traverse the area without getting stuck. So it is a challenge once we do find a wildfire in a Carolina Bay area of actually figuring out the best way to put it out, because oftentimes our heavy equipment that we utilize for fighting wildfires have a tendency to get stuck in that area. And so it's a real challenge to figure it out. All right, so those that aren't quite familiar with what a Carolina Bay is, there's been quite a bit of research on the origins of the Carolina Bays, but we are quite lucky in this area to have a large concentration of these land formations in this part of the state. Up where I am in Bladen County, there's quite a smattering of them in this area, just kind of channeled through. There's a graphic here to the left from some research that was done in the 70s, but wanted to show this as basically a depiction of how they're oriented. So most Carolina Bays, there are some exceptions, but most are in this northwest to southeast orientation. And most have this type of kind of shell on the outer edge here, the rim, that is sandy and has potential to hold a lot of organic soils due to the vegetation once it starts to lose its water holding there. So we do have quite a few of them here. You can see on the satellite image that some of them do hold water, but many of them are dry. A good bit of them have been converted up where we are to agriculture. So they've been drained with ditches and things like that, and they have crops in them. And of course, up here we have Holly Shelter Game Lands. You can see the outline of the bay there. And then down here to the south, we have Lake Waccamaw, which still holds quite a bit of water. So I wanted to highlight the Carolina Bays specifically because those do present quite a bit of challenge in our area for fighting wildfires. So wildfires, how and when, the big question, how do they start and when are they likely to happen? Let's take a look at a graph here. This looks almost like a echocardiogram, EKG there. But by the numbers for fire statistics, we have data going all the way back to the late 20s, 1928 to current. The number of fires that we've had throughout the time period has really fluctuated on a year-to-year basis. A lot of this can be due to weather, of course. You can see that we've had at least 1,000 or better fires every single year since the late 20s. And it does have a little tendency to trend upward in the past few years with the up and down cycle with weather. And the best that we can come up with as far as a reasoning behind that or to interpret the data would be that there's simply a lot more people in North Carolina than there ever have been before. We have quite a big population in the state for good reason. It's a great place to live. But there are more possibilities with more people being here to have fires in the state. All right, and taking a look at another graph, which is pretty opposite of the number of fires, is the number of acreage of the fires. So the level of acreage that we have from the 1928 to the present, thankfully, it has gone down. So for every fire that we have, the total number of acres per year is listed on the graph here. We used to have quite a few extremely large fires back in the 30s, 40s, and 50s. And then starting with it appears to be the late 80s or so, mid to late 80s, it really went down quite a bit. And the reasoning that we could give for that would be the same reason as the number of fires. There are simply more people in North Carolina. So there's less contiguous land, forested land, where these wildfires can grow and push through. If you think back, hundreds of years ago, it was all trees, many, many hundreds of years ago. So fires ran rampant through the area. They didn't have anything to stop them. This day and time, we have quite a significant infrastructure, many road systems, lots of housing areas. So the chances of fires to grow into the 700,000s is very rare because we simply don't have that much green space in a contiguous area that it couldn't be stopped. Also, the good thing is we have a lot of advanced training this day and time that we were not privy to back in the early 20s and the 40s. So our capabilities have changed. The equipment that we use has changed. The amount of training that we have for being able to detect fires and fight them with precision has also gotten better and changed as well through time. All right, so now let's do a little talk about causes of wildfires in North Carolina. We have 9 different cause classifications that when our folks go out to fight these wildfires, our law enforcement folks determine that these causes are the predominant ones that could take place on these wildfires, and we determine what the wildfire could have been caused by. So to give you the list, we have smoking, so just cigarettes, anything that is put out onto the road shoulder or grass or whatever that catches. Camping, campfires that happen to get away from the person that is camping. Machine use. So anytime a machine is being used or a machine is being driven on the road, if it creates a spark in some capacity and that spark then causes the wildfire, then that would be classified as the cause for that wildfire. One of the big ones for machine use is folks that are hauling trailers. If the chains are touching the pavement when they're driving, oftentimes that can create sparks. I've actually seen it going down the road myself, and it can be quite scary when you're passing that person, but it would be nothing for that spark to throw over into the road shoulder, and if it happens to be dry, then case in point. Lightning, that's a big one. And historically, that's where a lot of the wildfires happened, hundreds of thousands of years ago, is from lightning strike. And we still see quite a bit of that today. Railroads. So similar to machine use, oftentimes the railroads can either get really hot and cause a fire from the heat of the railroad metal, or sparks can be coming from the train itself from it passing through on the railroad. Those are two easy railroad classifications there. Debris burning. So just burning off your yard trash, the limbs and branches and trees or whatnot that folks need to burn off from debris in their yard to clean up. That's an easy cause for wildfires there if it happens to get away from them. If somebody wasn't watching it carefully, that could easily be a cause of wildfires. Children is listed as one of the causes of wildfires in North Carolina. Oftentimes, we do our best. We have our Smoky Bear messaging, of course, but on occasion, it can be determined that a child was the cause of a wildfire. Incendiary, which is, of course, intentional setting of fire to an area. This one, unfortunately, does happen where it was intentional that the person had full intentions of setting the wildfire. And then miscellaneous, we do happen to have this as a cause. Oftentimes, if it can't be determined that it was any of the others, it may fall into the miscellaneous category. Typically, we try to do our best to determine if it can be one of the other causes on the list here, but oftentimes it does fall in miscellaneous for various reasons. And then just to give you a glimpse of where we're at right now, this was data updated on June 7th, so just a few days ago. Currently for this month to date, we've had 62 wildfires in the state, and that's probably increased a good bit since the 7th. Number of acres, we're at 162. And then year to date, we've had 2,733 wildfires totaling over 10,800 acres. So quite on par for the year average there. All right. So looking at the causes of wildfires in North Carolina, we do have a pie chart of data that we've gathered since 1970 that shows what the most common cause of these wildfires are. And the number one, classically in most years, has always been debris burning at about 38% of all fires since 1970 coming from debris burning in some capacity. Next to that, we have found that 20% are incendiary. And this data comes from all of the wildfire data in North Carolina from the North Carolina Forest Service. So this is state and privately owned lands, not federal lands. Okay, we do have a good few in miscellaneous category. Then we have machine use and children equaling about 7% each. 8% falls into the smoking category. And then we go to railroad at 3%, lightning is 2%, and camping at 1%. So very interesting statistics there, but classically, throughout the years, debris burning has been the number one cause of wildfires in North Carolina. Okay, so wildfire seasonality. Is there a fire season in North Carolina? This graph, which you may not be able to see the numbers, but I want you to pay more attention to that red shaded area here, that polygon. We started the year in January, ended it in December here, and it talks about the number of wildfires that are seen in every single month of the year, classically from 1970 to 2022. That's what data that we've compiled so far. And as you can see, the spike starts in March, April timeframe, then it wanes off. And then we have another small spike going into October, November, which wanes off in December. So historically, we could say that there are wildfire seasons in North Carolina. The biggest one being in the spring, and then another blip in the fall. And those can be sort of attributed to two different events in North Carolina and a couple other things included. One of which is what we call the spring green up time frame, in which I'll explain in a minute. The other, later in the year, would be the fall leaf drop. And believe it or not, these two classically can be seen in different parts of the state. So most of the wildfires that happen during the springtime and the spring green up period can be seen in the coastal part or the Piedmont of the state. And then the fall leaf drop is more predominant in the mountain region of the state. And the reason for that would be the spring green up happens at a certain time where the weather is getting warmer. The vegetation still has a lot of dead leaf material that hasn't quite decomposed yet, that's still at the ground surface, and it has potential to burn. But at the same time, we're getting all these new leaves forming on the trees and bushes and other vegetation in the area. And while this is happening, the small leaves that are just starting to bud out, just starting to form on these trees, have a lot of waxiness to them. And as we mentioned earlier, waxy vegetation has a lot of play in wildfire intensity. So the waxy small leaves that are just forming on the vegetation, combined with last season's leaf litter that's still on the ground, is a perfect recipe on these early warm spring days, and lower humidity is starting to creep in as well, that it can have a lot of potential for wildfire. And typically this is seen where we'll have a lot of wildfire activity in the coast and the Piedmont during those 2 months. It doesn't so much happen in the mountains because they have a lot cooler temperatures than we do. It takes a lot longer for them to warm up. So it's not all unheard of that the mountains would have a fire in the springtime, but they are less likely. Where they tend to get most of their wildfires is during that fall leaf drop, and we'll see some pictures here in just a bit. Basically, in the fall season, the humidities get lower in the mountains and the leaves are starting to drop off the trees. They collect in certain areas, and it would be easy for something to catch fire that's in that leaf litter, the vegetation, that could cause wildfire to spread. Also, they have a lot of wind activity in the cooler months of the year as well, a lot of erratic wind patterns and things like that. So to take a look at a couple examples, this is a drone image from a spring wildfire that happened last year in Pender County in Holly Shelter Game Lands. It was over 1,000 acres, and it was from a lightning strike. So we had one of those springtime thunderstorms that rolled through. There was a lightning strike that took place right in the middle of this bay that we had seen earlier. And it sat there for a good few days. And then finally it got hot enough and got to the right fuel source where something caught fire, and the wind pattern, weather had a lot to do with it, storms coming through, whatnot. It spread like wildfire, so to speak. Sorry for the pun, but it did. And we ended up catching it just along the bend here, which is really good. You can see some of the tractor plow lines on this southeastern foot right here. But yeah, that was a really interesting wildfire that happened due to a spring weather event in the coastal part of the state. All right, then we have our fall fires in the mountains. And with the fires in the mountains, of course, topography plays a big role in this. This is right off of Pilot Mountain a few years back, but you can see they're working on this fire line here. Bottom is from the Lake Lure area, where you can see the beautiful fall foliage, but that also means that the leaves are getting ready to drop after a short time. Again, weather patterns playing quite a big role here. They had very low humidities and lots of wind events that played in both of these fires. All right, so who fights wildfires in North Carolina? It's a good question. Wildfire Response. North Carolina is nearly 19 million acres, and I'm sure that has changed since this publication, of forest land. Wildfire is one of the greatest threats and is important in this valuable natural resource. The North Carolina Forest Service is responsible by general statute for protecting state and privately owned forest land from wildfires, and our personnel train year-round in fire suppression tactics, strategy, and organization management to prepare for and lessen these impacts from wildfires. So you can see a few pictures here of examples of just some of the things that we do for fighting wildfires. We'll see a lot more pictures here in just a bit. I did want to share with you a little bit about our organization. A lot of folks aren't aware of how our agency is organized, and I think this plays a big role in how we fight wildfires. So a home base headquarters is at our central office in Raleigh, North Carolina. From there, we are divided into 3 different regions. The coast is Region 1, Piedmont's Region 2, Mountains Region 3. From there, each of the regions are divided into districts, as you can see those in the red numbers around the different areas. And each of the districts has a collection of our 100 counties throughout the state. We are mostly located in the District 8 area here, and it has several counties that belong to that particular district. Why this matters is how we fight the wildfires. So, initial attack. When we get a wildfire paged in, basically it comes through 911 dispatch and the pager goes off at any time of the day, 24 hours a day. Our folks will respond to a wildfire that's called in. The county receives the initial fire call that help is needed, and they will go out and look at the wildfire, determine what actions need to be taken. Often this is our county staff that are responding to these initial wildfire calls. And like I said, they will pick up the dozer, they'll pick up their trucks and do what they need to do, and get their equipment and get out there and fight those wildfires at any time of the day or night, depending on when they start. These folks are the ones that are hitting the ground running, and likely you would see any of our county staff, our assistant county rangers, county rangers. We have smoke chasers that they basically go and chase the smoke. If there's something that's called in, they go and investigate it and see what kind of resources are needed. And then our equipment operators, which bring the heavy muscle to fight the wildfires. If for some reason the county staff are unable to contain the fire, they can reach out for support from the district that they belong to. If for some reason the fire is large enough that the district is unable to handle that wildfire, they can reach out to the region for support and assistance. If for some reason that wildfire is large enough that the region is unable to support and fulfill all the needs that are required to fight this wildfire, they will rely on resources all throughout the state. And our dispatch center that we have as an agency in Raleigh is the one that coordinates that support and assistance as needed once it escalates to that level of complexity. So we have quite a great system in place for being able to fight wildfires, depending on the scale, the complexity, and the resources that are needed to do so. If things get very complex, we have incident management teams in place, which I had mentioned earlier. And the incident management team, this is sort of a schematic of how it's organized. It can be upwards of a couple dozen folks, but it's also scalable. So as needed, as the complexity increases or decreases, the positions can increase or decrease. The size of the number of personnel can increase or decrease as needed in order to manage the wildfire incident that we have in the state. And as Laura mentioned in the beginning, I belong to one of the incident management teams that's rostered by the North Carolina Forest Service as a public information officer. So I'm the one that gets to talk to the media and talk to the public about the wildfire and provide updates and information on the wildfire situation. And within each of these sections and branches and units and whatnot, there's a plethora of people that are assisting, that are supporting the incident itself. And of course, the operations section is the one that's carrying out the mission of stopping the wildfire or containing it. So just to show you a quick glimpse of what happens, we have an incident briefing. Communication is a very key part of what we do for large-scale incidences with wildfires. And every single morning of every single wildfire incident, the masses, all of the support system, all of the incident management team, everyone gets together and learns about the plan that's in place for the day. Then from there, after this briefing, there is a smaller briefing among all of the operations units, all of the staff that's responsible for carrying out the overall mission to stop the fire. This is a division, so one particular section of a wildfire, they're meeting together to figure out what their specific plan is on their section of the fire to be able to stop it. And this is for, you know, big, large-scale incidents, complex incidents where the fires are of a lot of moving parts, have a lot of people. Just to show you, that's the scale of the numbers that we're talking about when we have large-scale incidents. All right, so it's time to go to work. How does the North Carolina Forest Service fight a wildfire? We fight it with highly trained individuals and lots of equipment. Just to show you, our tractor plows, the backbone of the operation. Their mission is to push all of that organic soil that we talked about to bring it down to mineral soil, something that cannot burn. They also help make highways where highways are needed. If we need to get equipment in, they can help push up areas to provide a path for folks to get through. Fighting fire with water. We have a lot of different tanker systems. This is a very large tanker that holds 800 gallons. It's considered a Type 4 engine, which means it's quite a complex piece of equipment, a little bit bigger than what the county staff would have on that initial attack call. And this gentleman over here is spraying out one of those smoldering pockets that we mentioned earlier that could result in ground fire. On occasion, we fight fire with fire. So as you can see in this image, the fire line is up here in the upper right corner. Occasionally, the best option for us, because we can't reach this area with fire, or with water, excuse me, is to put fire down to meet it and stop that line from progressing. Essentially, what this person is doing is they are removing that one element of the fire triangle. They're taking out the available fuel that this fire has to burn, and they're doing it in such a way that it's controlled, that it's easily watched, that somebody is monitoring, so that when his fire that he's putting down meets that fire, that whole area is no longer able to produce any wildfire. We call that a burnout operation. We're burning out the available fuel that's ahead of the wildfire front in a controlled way that it keeps the fire from progressing. The Skidgen. All right, this monster here is a piece of equipment that I first became aware of this past fall in the mountains. It has some heavy tires on it. It's actually a skitter, which was used in is used in logging operations, that has been converted into an engine for sending water around and being able to spray areas that are burning. This Skidgen unit holds, I believe, about 250 gallons of water, if I'm not mistaken. It's really beefy because it's got those big tires there, and it can move in some of this rocky mountainous terrain that some other pieces of equipment can't get to. And of course, get the spray pump where it needs to go. The full track. So the full track is another piece of equipment that's really handy in our neck of the woods. It has a track system, which means that it's got a really great capability, almost like our dozers do, to get in through rooted and heavy vegetation, as you can see on the right here. It carries a tank that has a 500-gallon water capacity to it. And it carries a crew of people as needed, and it can also have a really good turn radius in some of those tighter areas to be able to get where it needs to in this heavy vegetation. We have quite a few of these throughout the coastal region of the state. Occasionally, we get to fight fire with aircraft. So we have our own aviation division in the North Carolina Forest Service that has hangars throughout the state. And these folks are trained pilots that work with us and work with equipment on the daily to help us fight fire. So this is a picture inside of a helicopter that's scouting out a wildfire, also in sort of a bay area here, as you can see. And this is what we have for helicopters and putting water on the fire. So helicopters are really great. This A-Star Helo uses about a 210-gallon bucket, and then we have another kind of helicopter that also uses a 240-gallon bucket, as you see here. And the great thing about a helicopter is that it has a really quick turnaround time. Once it expels the water on the fire here, it can go and get into a really tight space if it needs to reload its bucket to fill with water and put on the fire. The only negative is it only carries 200 gallons at the time, so it has to make many passes back and forth to its water source in order to get more water to put on the fire. But it's really great in those tight spaces, as I mentioned. Another piece of equipment that we have are our single engine air tankers, or seats. These guys are great because they hold a lot of water. So this fixed wing aircraft can hold 800 gallons of water, and it can do a full drop all at one time, or a partial drop where it could go through and put 400 gallons in and then make another pass and put 400 more gallons on the fire, just depending on what the need is. So the single engine air takers are super great because of the water capacity they have. The negative is they usually have to go to an airport or a landing source that is able to have runway to be able to reload their water or fire suppressant. Then we have our drones, our unmanned aircraft. We do have quite a few drones in the Forest Service used for many different things. Typically on wildfires, our drones operate at night. And the reason for that is, and unfortunately I'm not a drone person, so bear with me, but the difference in pigment that you're seeing on the screen here, it's a lot more visible to see fire pockets and smoldering pockets in a wildfire at nighttime because of the contrast, the darkness of the sky versus the light smoke or heat signatures in the ground. So in that left picture there, the glitter that you see on the screen, those are actually all the heat pockets or smoldering pockets that are on the wildfire. It could be ground fire. It could just be in a smoldering area that's sitting there and not necessarily going into ground fire, but we're sure going to check it and make sure that all of that's extinguished before our crews head home and out of there. And this is a drone in the upper right, very small, not very large at all, but it carries a lot of tech and has a lot of really great information. Then we have a couple of our guys that are drone pilots here in the bottom right, and their equipment that they utilize. They're looking at a system and setting it up now. And just a little friendly PSA from your local public information officer. If you fly, we can't. This was a publication that was made by the USDA Forest Service, but we use it quite a bit on our incidents. We cannot fly our aircraft if there are other drones or other aircraft over a wildfire incident, period. There's no exception. And oftentimes we put a temporary flight restriction in place over a wildfire that will allow us to be able to have complete control over that airspace during times of a wildfire incident response to make sure that there are no other aircraft in the area. This day and time when it's so easy to go and purchase a drone on Amazon and get really cool pictures, it's becoming more and more of a challenge to keep folks out of these wildfire areas, but we really need to make sure that we give our personnel and firefighters all the space that they need so that there aren't any safety issues down the road. All right, other tools in the toolbox. So we have pump and sprinkler operations. Believe it or not, we can put a sprinkler system remotely on a wildfire if people can't get to it easily to put the fire out, or our equipment can't. These pumps, I will say we don't have those in the warehouse, out back or whatnot. We actually ordered those up from a federal system, but I did think that the picture was really impressive because look at them compared to that excavator right there next to it. Those are monsters. We do happen to have smaller pumps, lower volume pumps that we utilize on most of our wildfires in the state as needed. And then, of course, that sprinkler system. A leaf blower, you wouldn't think it, but we actually utilize leaf blowers, especially in the mountains, to clear areas where leaves are collecting that could potentially catch fire from embers that are spotting over or spreading from the original wildfire imprint. And a leaf blower works wonders to make that fire break happen. A flex track. So this is very similar to a dozer. It can carry a plow, but it has some capability to work on wetter soils and marshier areas. The flex track can carry a 250-gallon water tank, and it is very helpful in these wetter areas, especially in the northeast part of the state. The Marshmaster, and apologies for the very grainy photo, that's all I could get today, but it is an amphibious track vehicle. You see the track on it there. It can go in pretty much wet areas, marshy areas, sop and wet areas. It floats, so it's a really great tool for us to utilize. It can actually spray water. It can mash down the marsh grasses and create its own fire break because the water fills in where it mashes down the marshy areas. And it can hold water in pontoons and use it to pump some. So that's a really great tool to utilize again in some of those marshier sound areas up in the Northeast. Hand crews. When we can't get equipment, we do have a couple hand crews to stand up in the state. Usually it's a little bit less than a couple dozen folks that are together on a team. And they go out with their tools and they clear the land by hand. And if you're talking a dirty job, this can certainly be it. These folks are champions with being able to utilize a rake to get through an area. You might see a chainsaw that's in the background there. There's a couple that carry chainsaws to remove that vegetation and pretty much do whatever it takes to make a fire break happen in those areas, especially in the mountains where you can't get equipment to put a highway in. And then finally, cooperator support. Believe it or not, even though we've got all the smarts to do wildfire fighting and all the equipment that we could possibly have, occasionally it really helps to bring on cooperators, especially if it's on some of the lands that may belong to other state agencies. It's really helpful to have cooperators to have that expertise of their own properties to be able to help us fight fire. Some of them even have equipment that we utilize on wildfire fighting in that area. So folks such as structure fire departments, VFDs, Nature Conservancy, nonprofit, NC Parks, North Carolina Wildlife Resources Commission, emergency management officials, federal folks, resources from other states. Occasionally we have to call in and open up the system, which brings in help from other states and countless others. We had a fire in the mountains right before Thanksgiving last year, and we had to call in resources nationally to assist with that because of the complexity of it. It was a really interesting one. But there were folks there from Washington, Oregon, South Dakota, lots of different states represented. Okay, so could it happen to you? We're winding down here. This is just a picture of the city of Reno, Nevada, and I'm just showing you, this is a big city, and they back right on up to an area that had wilderness and it was fighting fire. So yeah, we'd expect that maybe out west somewhere, California, big fires. But to give you perspective, April 19th of 2023, New Bern, North Carolina, they were seeing this in their backyard. these communities that are just to the south of New Bern area were seeing a fire on federal lands. This was in Croatan National Forest, and it had taken a spike due to some erratic weather and was starting to creep towards the Blue Water Rise community, and this is what they saw. So yes, it is potential for wildfires to impact our neighborhoods. Talk a little bit about the wildland-urban interface. So the wildland-urban interface is defined as an area where homes and communities meet or intermingle with undeveloped wildland vegetation. This information is so critical that I just got it straight from the resistwildfirenc.org website, so feel free to refer to that later if you'd like. Wildfires that occur in the WUI can be extremely dangerous or destructive to lives and property. I wanted to highlight that, bold it, and turn it yellow because it's very important. And just a few stats from what we have here in North Carolina. We're #1 in the nation of area and acres in the wildland-urban interface at 39.8%. A lot of folks think that these statistics are out west statistics, but it's right here in North Carolina. We're #4 in the nation for number of homes that are located in the wildland-urban interface, also #4 for the number of people, and #6 in the nation for the number of seasonal homes in the wildland-urban interface. So just wanted to show you another map here, a little bit of orientation. Oak Island is here, Carolina Beach, Wilmington. Just a little perspective. This is from December of 1984. And I want to, I might be highlighting near where your homes may be, so apologies for picking on you, but I did want to cover this particular area that is southwest of Wilmington. You see all this nice green space here. And throughout the years, December of 2020, there's not so much green space there. There's actually a lot of white space. And if we were to zoom in on that, that is a whole new housing development that has come about in just this short a period of time between 1984 and 2020. In a pretty green area still. So something to consider with the development that's happening in our particular neck of the woods. Everybody loves getting down to the coast and the beach, but we do back up a lot of our towns and cities to a fair amount of green space, and it should be made aware of. So we have something called home ignition zones, and what these are, they were developed in the late 1990s by a retired USDA Forest Service fire scientist. And it's broken out into 3 zones. The immediate zone is 0 to 5 feet, intermediate is 5 to 30 feet, extended is 30 to 100 feet, but can extend out further. And these zones are zones of protection. So the immediate zone is an area where you need immediate protection from wildfire. Intermediate is an area that you want to start looking at how to create fire breaks in places that you can keep fire from spreading so quickly with hardscaping and planned landscaping. The extended zone, which goes out to 200 feet from the home itself, you want to try to reduce flame size and interrupt fire travel. So any way that you can reduce the amount of vegetation that's clumped together in this area. Driveways are a really good example. Different things that you can do that can slow the spread of wildfire is the premise behind the home ignition zones. So the next question is, well, how do I do that? What can you do? Knowledge is power. For one thing, making yourself more knowledgeable about these different things that you can do is very helpful. And then small, simple changes can make a big difference. I'm not going to go through and read every single one of these items here on this poster for the fire resistant home, but you can get this very poster in PDF form on resistwildfirenc.org. To give you a couple quick examples, the very first one is to clean debris from roof and gutters. And I'm guilty of it too as well. So it's really something important to remember that if you have a clean roof, there's less chance of embers falling onto the roof and catching fire. Other easy things that you can do is just how you have your vegetation spaced, creating gravel areas or driveways to reduce fire spread, propane tank in the back, keeping that further away from the house. Small, simple things that you can do to help have a fire resistant home. And just wanted to do a shameless plug real quick. Under construction at Turnbull Creek ESF, we have actually created a wildland urban interface defensible space model ranger station. It's a very big mouthful, but it has a lot of purpose to it, and we're very excited. This is in our wildfire control exhibit. It is a model home with a metal roof, aluminum underpinning, and cement board siding. It has a paver patio and flagstone fire break set up, so it kind of resists fire from spreading in those directions towards the house. We also have fire-resistant vegetation and spacing guidelines that were derived from the Fire-Resistant Landscaping in North Carolina publication, which I have a screenshot of down here in the bottom left-hand corner. This was a really great resource to utilize to learn about low flammability plants that we can put out in our little landscape model home here, model ranger station, that may be able to resist wildfire. And it's a really great tool. It's free. You can get it from online. It's a really great resource. And the cool thing about this and why it has such a long name is you see this icon here that I'm highlighting with my cursor. It's a fire tower. So this is actually going to double as a model ranger station to tell the story of fire towers, fire tower history, and all the different jobs that are focusing on fighting wildfires in North Carolina. And this is what it looks like right now. There's our big old fire tower. We're still needing to put some flagstone down, and some of the vegetation needs a little work, but for the most part, we're getting there. So we're really excited to have this as a resource for folks to come and learn about how they can make their homes defensible spaces. All right, home stretch. I did want to share real quick that this is a really cool sign and a really neat thing that you can see in your Holly Shelter game land. It is the only listed extreme forest fire danger area in the whole state. This can be found on Shaw Highway coming from the North Carolina Highway 53 side going towards the game lands. And it's a pretty neat picture to see that one of our areas has been designated as an extreme forest fire danger area. And rightfully so, because it has had some quite extreme forest fires in that particular area. All right, so a couple things I wanted to highlight as a public information officer, because I get this quite a bit, and I wanted to talk about it for a quick minute. As we see here, we have a nice, beautiful buck that's running from the fire, that's approaching to the right-hand side here and heading to some nicer green vegetation. A lot of times I see on wildfire incidents, folks message in on the court of Facebook often, what about the animals? The animals are losing their homes. This is bad. It's a travesty. And it is, wildfires are bad. They're not something ideal. It's not controlled. It's wild. It's a wildfire. But the animals are going to be okay. The animals have dealt with fire. It's been around for a very long time. They have a natural instinct to run away from danger. Those that can't run or fly will often hide and try to hunker down and wait for the fire to pass and do the best they can. And then once the area begins to have regrowth, the animals will return. In fact, a lot of that regrowth is really good for vegetation that feeds them. So the animals ultimately will find a better place to shelter for a quick minute, often like we do with hurricanes that come through. And then once everything is in the clear again, they'll revisit that home that they once had. And speaking of regrowth, I did want to also share this particular graphic here. This was from a fire I was on last year. I was there for a 2-week assignment. That's our typical assignment on a wildfire is 14 straight days of work. And by the time the fire had completed, by the time I had left my assignment, the grass was already beginning to regrow in the burn area, as you can see here in all of these little spots. It's small, it's just grasses, I know, but it is starting to show signs of regrowth. The fire itself was able to get quite a bit of rain on it before we left, and from that, the grass shoots began to grow quickly. So just wanted to say a few notes that natural succession is common, and it's a normal thing after a disturbance where pioneer species return and then more complex species. The turnaround time varies, but ultimately the vegetation will grow back in time. Often fire removes some of the overgrowth and restores natural vegetation for that area. And if you were to go look at this area now, it would look completely different. It would be beautiful vegetation throughout. The trees have recovered since, and everything looks just about back to the way it was before the wildfire came through. So, want more fire info? The final piece here. If you're looking and hankering for a little bit more fire information, you can visit the North Carolina Forest Service website at ncforestservice.gov. If you go to the Programs and Services tab right here where I'm highlighting, it takes you to Fire Control and Prevention as one of your options in the drop-down menu. And this is a great resource for anything related to wildfire, whether it's the current wildfire situation in the state, any type of fire control information, more than just in North Carolina, but the Southern Wildfire Risk Assessment, tools and equipment, photo galleries, different things, and then any kind of burning permits, fire environment, training opportunities, things like that. And put the QR code down here at the bottom left. We'll see that again at the end, but this is our subscription service. So if you're interested in wanting to know more about fire through an email or text subscription service to include wildfires that are happening in the state, larger ones, we can certainly get you informed by clicking that QR code and subscribing to our service. Resist Wildfire NC. This is what the website looks like. A lot of that information you already saw tonight that I shared. We've got a couple little tools over here on the top left, or middle left, I suppose. Homeowner and community resources, links to utilize. At one point, they had a fuels removal program. I'm not 100% sure the status of that at this point, but certainly worthwhile to take a look. And then Firewise USA and Firewise information. So great information on how you can resist wildfire and make your home more defensible against wildfires. And finally, another shameless plug, our educational state forest. Luke and Laura and I were talking about this in the beginning. We have a great resource in our state of educational state forest. We have 6 that are available to you now, and a 7th one coming into Stokes County in the coming years. And what we do is we talk to the public about anything forestry related, and that does include wildfires. Most of us have some form of a wildfire control exhibit. The last 2, the middle and the one in the right, those pictures are from my particular forest in Bladen County in Elizabethtown. And if you're interested, we take groups for guided tours and activities regarding fire control and anything forestry related. It's a free service that we offer, and we can set you up with a class if you have a school group or a youth group. Any group, any size, feel free to give us a call, and we'd be happy to take you in and teach you a little bit about forestry or wildfires or anything related to trees. And then some final thoughts before we part. Fire is a natural part of our lives. It's not going away. It's something that we're living with day in and day out, and it's part of our lives here to stay. We can do things to prevent it or slow the spread. There are definitely some tools in the toolbox that we can use to keep fire at bay. And one of those is to just make sure you watch any type of flame that you set out in the wilderness, whether it's a campfire or debris burning in your yard. It's very important to keep a watch on those fires. A note that there are a plethora of complex factors involved when fighting a wildfire, but firefighting priorities are protecting life of the public, property, livelihood, and natural resources. And then firefighter safety is also a top priority for us when we're out there fighting those wildfires. And a big one, help us help you. Stay informed, be wildfire aware, and be a friend to Smokey Bear. There's my buddy there at the bottom right. The more informed that you can be about wildfire situation, If someone's telling you that you need to evacuate or prepare to evacuate, listen. That's really helpful. Those messages come from emergency management, so definitely stay informed of those types of things. Know when it's a good time to burn. Pay attention to those weather cues that we talked about in the beginning. If it's not a good time, if you're hesitant at all, it's not a good time to burn. So be wildfire aware on that. And finally, a quick wrap up referring to my buddy Smokey Bear there. It is his 80th year this year, 80th birthday. So 80 years of preventing wildfires together. And we owe a lot to old Smokey Bear to do our best to keep wildfires out of the forest and anywhere else that they might be. And that's it from me, Luke and Laura.
Thank you so much, Carrie. And we'll make sure to include all those links in a follow-up email. And yeah, we really appreciate your time and your knowledge about fire and for laying it out so clearly for us all to learn. And man, the little kid in me really loved to see all the cool equipment that you guys use to fight fire, especially
Yeah.
the skidgen, I believe you called it. But
Yep.
but
Yep.
I was smiling through that. I don't want to take too much more of your time, but so maybe just 2 or 3 questions. Does that sound okay?
Yeah, that's perfect.
So I guess I had one just right off the bat that I was wondering. So how, and this isn't really a direct question, but how is your experience and knowledge about wildfires, about fires in general, and forestry? How has that changed the way you go on a casual walk in the woods, or has it changed that?
Yeah, it definitely has. I had a little bit of knowledge of invasive species before going into this profession. Once upon a time ago, I worked for a conservation group in Virginia, and that was my whole job was to look for invasive species. So that's a big one, making sure that what's not natural is out of here. And oftentimes those are also things that catch fire quite a bit. Um, Otherwise, just different forestry management tactics, things that we can do to have better sustainability and mindfulness as far as how we protect our forests, being able to make sure that they're healthy, because also unhealthy forests can result in wildfire spread. If they're diseased and have a lot of insect infestations, they die off quicker, and dead trees make really great fire tinder. So it all kind of relates in a really weird way. We have different branches in the Forest Service, a forest management branch and a wildfire control branch, and they intertwine quite a bit, surprisingly. But as far as wildfires go, seeing a lot of overgrown vegetation, that can be a really good source for fire. Being more weather aware, as I mentioned in the beginning to you when we first joined on, I have never been more of a closet meteorologist in my life than before I joined the Forest Service, and now I'm all about the weather. So we watch a lot of different weather parameters that are related to fire quite frequently, and we get reports and updates every single day at the beginning of the day and in the afternoon when the potential for wildfires is the highest because of the drought, potential for lower humidities and warmer temperatures. So that awareness is definitely keyed in by being part of the North Carolina Forest Service.
Yeah, I wanted to be a pilot for a brief spell, and when I was going through training, I thought I was training just to be a meteorologist.
Yeah, yeah, it's
Um,
real.
yeah, oh my gosh. And another question I just was thinking while you were talking is, are there any new technologies or techniques or equipment that you think that might be on the horizon that you think will leverage the ability to fight and prevent wildfires?
The drones are where it's at. I mean, it is so advanced, the things that they're capable of these days. We have the drones that have the heat signature technology in them, the infrared cameras and things like that. We also have drones that help with prescribed burning and being able to do aerial ignition from just drones. So it's really fascinating, and the number of folks that we have that are interacting with drones in the Forest Service has increased exponentially in the past 3 to 5 years, and the technology is steadily increasing as well. So the capability that we have is amazing as far as what that goes. Now, I will give credit where credit's due. Those dozers, they're the power horses. They're the ones that are going to push the stuff through the forest that needs to get pushed out of the way to fight these fires and put those fire breaks in. So there's something to be said about the technology that's been around since day one. We are fortunate at my forest to have one of the very first dozer that was ever had in Bladen County for fighting wildfires. And the technology has changed quite a bit. We have a newer one from the 90s as well. A lot more creature comforts than those old ones that they had, but the premise is still the same. The science behind it is still the same, that we want to make sure we open it up to mineral soil so we don't have the fire spreading.
Laura had a quick question here. Laura's wondering what led you to become a forest supervisor?
That's a good question. So before I was a forest supervisor, I was actually the other position. There are just two of us that work that 890-acre forest that I was mentioning, the education state forest that I'm at. I was the education ranger, so the second in command, essentially. I jumped on board with that position because I was always interested in education. I had come from a bit of a different background than forestry, so forestry was not my main mission. Absolutely love it now, would not go back, no hesitation, just because of all the cool stuff that we get to do and the fun things we get to learn. Um, but being at our forest and being able to have a completely different day every single day, see the cool stuff. I can't tell you how many days I see a fox squirrel every single week. I mean, it's just magical to see those guys. And the wildlife that we see, just the changes in the forest. There was a stand of longleaf pine that was planted in the year that I started. And so it's almost like I've gotten to grow up with them, so to speak, through the two positions that I've been in at the forest. And as far as the forest supervisor position goes, it just you get a little bit more experience on your back there, and you get a chance to make some other big changes. So um, I have a lot of say so in what we do as far as forest management goes. So how the forest changes, and we are a receipts-based forest, which means that we are not given appropriated funds to operate from. So anything that we do on the forest as far as our harvesting goes for sustainable practices, that money goes back into our operating budget, and we use that to operate off of our daily running of the ship, so to speak, everything from the Wi-Fi to the water quality. We do it all based on the timber harvest that we have on the forest and the pine straw raking. So it's a really neat aspect to work at a forest like that. And just interacting with the public has been really awesome too, being able to do that. So forest supervisor, I love the forest and I live in it. I work there quite a bit. So yeah, that would be it for me. It's just a really cool dynamic job.
Yeah, it sounds like your job really stinks, right?
It's not a bad gig.
No. Yeah, I say the same thing about my job. I'm got to go on a
Ah,
nature walk tomorrow. Oh my gosh, it's just the
ah,
worst. But
darn.
Diane is wondering, when burning wood in your backyard fire pit, Diane has heard to never burn pine. Is that true? And
Okay.
would a fire screen help? Diane lives under and she backs up to pine trees.
Gotcha.
Yeah,
Okay.
the question there is, should you burn pine or no?
Yeah, so you can burn pine. It would be not a great option if you were wanting like a fire for a fire pit, like a campfire, or if you were hanging out next to your fire pit in an evening or whatever. The reason for that is all that resin that I had mentioned. It is very sappy. There's a lot of sap flow in pines, and that catches fire quite a bit, and so it produces an exorbitant amount of smoke. And our hardwoods simply don't have that. They still produce sap, but they don't produce it to the magnitude and the quantity that pines do. And so they burn a lot cleaner, if that makes sense. So if you're looking at just a fire pit, campfire, or toasting some marshmallows or whatnot, hardwoods are the way to go. A lot of folks do burn some of their pine material for debris burning. If they're clearing their yard or whatnot, they'll throw their pine branches in if they've fallen It does produce quite a bit of smoke, so it definitely needs to be watched, especially on those wildfire weather caution days. Um, so that would somewhat be my answer. Is it can burn, but if you were going for the aesthetic of it and having a nice night by the campfire, it's not an ideal species.
Thank you. So maybe as a final question here, when you're speaking to groups about wildfires, what do you find that resonates most often with people?
That's a very good question. I think it's the relatability. That I would almost be willing to bet that that picture from Newbern that I showed of the homes in the back and the fire in the background, that really resonates to people in some capacity, whether they've heard about it or it's shocking. Um, it can happen to you. You know, there's potential there. I would say the making it as common as possible of a language, you know, talking to folks and sharing experiences and stories of how things have happened or, you know, things to look out for, things that make it personable to you. If it impacts you in a certain way, then you're likely to remember it, you know. So trying to relate it back to that particular person that I'm talking to or that group that I'm talking to is the biggest thing that I try to convey is yes, you have a piece to play in this. It's Smokey Bear said, we all can prevent wildfires. So the more relatable it is, the more people are able to listen in on it.
Thank you so much, Carrie. This was really informative to me, and I hope for everyone else as well. And again, I'll send out an email with all your information and links and whatnot. And again, thank you so much. We really appreciate your time.
Yeah, definitely. No problem. And I will go ahead and throw my email in the chat. Feel free to message me if you're interested. And as I had told Luke before, I am not a fire scientist, so I'm a basic general educator with a little bit of fire knowledge, and I may not be able to answer your question directly, but I do happen to know a couple people that might. So we'll do our best to try to get you an answer as best possible. And do come by and see us. We'd love to share our forest. Even if myself and my ranger are not there, there's plenty to see. Sometimes we're off the forest since it's just two of us. We have a few things to do here and there with other parts of our agency, but there's plenty to see even if you don't schedule a guided activity with us. So come on out, enjoy the hiking that we have, the exhibits that we have, the picnic shelter. We'd love to have you.
Well, I'm heading down to the coast soon, so might drop in on the way.
Come on out. Yeah.
Thanks, Gary. And I did just see John's question there. I'm glad you put your email in. So,
Yeah.
John, if you could reach out to Carrie, that'd be great. Yeah,
Please do.
thank you again. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. All right. And that concludes the webinar.
Awesome.
Thanks,
Thank
guys.
you.
Have a good night.
Thanks.